I'd like to start as close as we can to the beginning because I know many of our students are going to run out to classes and dinner when we're done. I hope people will continue to come in. Tonight is a very special privilege for me to introduce Sandra Fenwick as our speaker. I was 23 years old when I started as an intern at Children's Hospital. Really learned a lot about medicine and growing up, and really a extreme commitment to the well-being of children, families, and society in general. And it's something that stuck with me my entire life, really colored my perspective to what science is all about, what learning is all about. And Sandra is the president and CEO of Children's Hospital now. And her position there represents a change in medicine that I just want to comment on very briefly, but one that's very important for our students. And that is, historically, institutions, incredible medical institutions and research institutions, like Children's, were led by MDs. Now, with the changes that have happened in medicine, it takes a much broader experience that transcends science, transcends business and technology and society and policy. And many of the things that we hope you, mostly students here, are learning in your experience at Children's. So we've asked Sandra to talk about innovation in the 21st century, the children's experience. And as you'll see, Children's is a leader in so many ways of what the future is for healthcare and for medicine. Sandra Fenwick's background, she's joined Boston in 1999, originally in business development, strategy, ambulatory care operations, became the chief operating officer, president in 2008, and chief executive in 2013. She is involved in so many things beyond only Children's, really the greater mission of children and families and public health, with too many things here to really go through. Her background is a public health degree, a degree in health services administration from the University of Texas School of Public Health, in addition to her undergraduate degree from Simmons College. It's a particular pleasure to have you here, and I'm very much looking forward to your comments today.
Oh, there it is. I almost lost my prop. Well, good evening, and thanks all of you for coming out. This is a particularly fun time for me. As I was driving up, I remember coming many times. My daughter and my son-in-law both graduated from Bentley, and I spent many nights running up here to bring clothes and laundry and food. And so I remember my way here very easily. So thank you for coming out. This is a great opportunity for me to talk about something that is also near and dear to my heart, because I've been at Children's, as you heard, for over almost 17 years. Before that, I was at the Beth Israel Hospital for almost 23. And I haven't really left the neighborhood since I went to college there too. So it's been a wonderful journey, but it's been an opportunity for me to really be part of a group of organizations within the Harvard medical community that truly does believe in everything that you also heard, which is we start with a mission. It's really important to us to stay grounded in what's important to us. We are a hospital. We are a children's hospital. We are I like to say, the #1 children's hospital in U.S. News and World Report. But that is a distinction that I think is very important, because it is now based almost entirely on really hard data. Data about breadth and depth of services, about quality, about safety, about innovation. And that's really what we pride ourselves with. Because science and discovery and innovation is really we like to say it's really in our DNA. And I'm going to go over a little bit of history and then bring you to the present. But our mission is a four-part mission: care, research and innovation, teaching, and teaching in the broadest sense, not just medical residents, but it's nursing students, and it's really a whole variety of practitioners, clinicians, and even people in business. And we also have a deep commitment to our community. We are deeply embedded in our community and working on issues of poverty and issues of illness in children who are subjected to the scourges of both poverty, economic deprivation, sometimes physical and abusive deprivation. And so it's a real honor for us to also be very embedded in our community. What really makes us unique is this intersection between care and what we do for children, whether it's children that we take care of in the community, children we take care of in the hospital, or children that we're now able to actually take care of around the world and across the country. This past year, we saw kids from every state in the United States and over 120 different countries. And so our reach is getting broader and broader. Part of that is because of the science and the innovation that makes us a destination for children who are really coming for unknown conditions, kids who have had problems that were undiagnosed elsewhere, kids who are looking for treatments that are not available elsewhere, and the like. And it really is that scientific breakthrough, that application of those scientific breakthroughs, and the innovations that really are driving both the care and the treatments of care that really make us, I think, unique. So let me just start a little bit with the history, because as I said, innovation and science and discovery is really embedded in who we are. If you look back, we were founded almost 150 years ago. But if you look at the dates here, 1920, almost 100 years ago, our clinicians started to say, we're not satisfied with the tools, with the resources, with the approaches, the procedures that we have to take care of kids. And we started with Dr. Ladd, who was our chief of surgery back then, to really start looking at different forms of corrective surgery for things that were not even available. In 1938, we performed the very first open heart surgery to correct a congenital heart defect in a child. And then in 1954, Dr. Enders won the Nobel Prize for culturing the polio virus. That the building that now most of our research, and I'm sure you spent time in there, our Enders building is named after Dr. Enders, which really formed the basis for the polio vaccine. From that, we also went forward with the measles vaccine. Porter Anderson identified the Haemophilus influenza vaccine. We created the HIV vaccine. And it just goes on and on, where one discovery leads to many, many others. In 1990, Dr. Joe Murray won the Nobel Prize for performing one of the first organ transplants in a child at Boston Children's. And then you keep going. You keep looking at, next to 2008, Chris Walsh, our chief of genetics, identified one of the genes that's responsible for autism in children. And up all the way through to today, where we have been part of now an international gene therapy trial. And we have, and I may get into that later, but some really exciting results. This has been decades in the making, and we now have 5 open trials in gene therapy, with one hopefully to start with sickle cell disease. So as you can see, it really crosses so many of the things that impact children, children's lives, and children's disease. We are the largest pediatric research program in the world. Our NIH funding is the largest in any pediatric hospital, but we're the 3rd largest to receive NIH funding of any of the freestanding hospitals. Mass General, the Brigham lead us, and we are number 3. And in fact, there are 2 others in Boston that are 4 and 5. That's the BI and Dana-Farber. So it's an environment where there is a really exciting interchange across even competing institutions, especially at the innovation and the science level. So this has been very important to us. This is a measure of not just our ability to have the funding, but it's an ability to, I think, identify that this is getting harder and harder from a peer-reviewed perspective to get funding. I think they're paying at about the 8th percentile. 8%, you have to be really, it's sort of the reverse. It's the 8th percentile as opposed to the 92nd percentile, which is where they're paying out right now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what science and discovery is at Boston Children's. If you look at the top line, you can see that this is really where we started, sort of the basic research in the laboratory, and then increasingly, and only up until the last, say, 6 or 7 years, did we really say that the science, the real identification of some of the basic biology of disease, start being appreciated, that the translation of that all the way through this very, very complex and very difficult chain where it eventually goes through translational research, sometimes in the lab, and then all the way through clinical trials, through multiple clinical trials, and hopefully FDA approval, and then out to the public, so out to patients, is many times a very long journey. You've probably been hearing a lot about this, that sometimes the pipeline is at least 10 to 15 years, and 10 is probably the short time frame. And so that has been really where we started. We were really working a lot in the lab. We have over 800,000 square feet of lab space with science going on across every single discipline in the basic sciences and in all of the clinical areas. So in ophthalmology, in surgery, in heart, in cardiology, in cardiac surgery, in all of these areas, we have basic science going on and translation of that science to drugs, to therapeutics, and now increasingly, as we move to some of these other areas, clinical research that is now at the bedside. So what's really exciting, I think, about a place like Children's is that we really, even more so today, are honoring and recruiting people who are physician scientists. We have PhDs, we have pure clinicians, but a growing number of physician scientists who really go from the bed to the bench and back to the bedside with clinical problems that they're looking for solutions for, go into the lab, sometimes themselves with other research assistants and other PhDs, and then take their work, their discoveries, and actually try and bring them right back into the patient population. And so we are now increasingly working in both clinical and procedural interventions, and I'm going to give you some examples of some of the things that we're doing now. Devices, a lot of devices that relate to, for instance, cardiac surgery or neurosurgery, where we're increasingly able to miniaturize a lot of the devices that are now available for children. Many, many times we have been struggling because so much of what's available on the market, and there's a lot of interesting business complexities related to this. The pediatric marketplace is very small compared to the adult marketplace. So in many instances, we have to come up with our own solutions for our patients when we realize that there are opportunities to actually change the course of disease or change the course of clinical problems or congenital problems in children. So we're working on devices, we're doing population studies in children. In particular, one of the areas that we're increasingly interested in is this whole area of developmental medicine, mental illness, and autism, and how all of that is impacting children's health, and obviously huge costs of care across the country. And then we're working, and I'm going to give you some examples too, about where is this going? Where is both science going, but where are the innovations going in healthcare in general, but also specifically within pediatrics? So big data, huge. Lots and lots and lots of exciting things going on. We have one of the largest bioinformatics programs in the country. The person who founded that program, Dr. Zach Kahani, and I think you remember him well too, has now just formed a department at Harvard Medical School. So now the medical schools are starting to get involved in developing these big data and genetic and genomic departments. Remote health, and I'll give you some examples of that. Software development, so tools for physicians either at the bedside for monitoring chronic disease in children and the like. Genomics, huge. We're looking at not only how do you treat disease, but how do you understand the basic understanding of what is going on in especially rare diseases. Children who come to us where there is no diagnosis, there is no understanding, sometimes for decades, for some of these people who are coming to a place like Boston Children's for an answer as to what's causing their symptoms, what's causing their disease. And then we have decision support tools. So much of what's becoming so complicated today we're seeing an increasing number of very complex kids coming needing services across multiple clinical departments and figuring out how these various services work together, the drugs that are now available, the drug-drug interactions that are so complicated. So much of what is needed now for these clinicians is to have decision support tools that actually guide them so that all of this information doesn't have to be stored and retrieved in their own brains. And then obviously there's a lot going on with wearables. And I'll give you a couple of examples of those. So when I mentioned that some of the business side of what we're dealing with in a place like Boston Children's, the challenge is that the market is small, and sometimes there's a big opportunity that we land on, and other times we have to create products that are specifically available for children. These are some of the products that have been invented at Children's. As you can see, there's a couple up top. Some of you may remember the drug thalidomide. It was basically in the late 50s, early 60s when pregnant women were taking this drug, and it produced, unfortunately, children with either missing or totally deformed limbs. The reason for that is because of something called angiogenesis. And one of our researchers identified, who was working in this whole field of angiogenesis, which is the formation of blood vessels or the lack of formation of blood vessels in the body, he found that by understanding the biology of what happens in angiogenesis, that this drug thalidomide that had been taken off the market could be used to actually stunt the growth of tumors, because if you could apply this thalidomide, it would actually cut off the blood supply of tumors that were being fed by blood vessels. So it's those kinds of interesting connections and discoveries that lead to other either re-applications of drugs. The next one down, Namenda, was discovered at Children's, but is now the second major drug for treating Alzheimer's. It is a way of now at least slowing, if not arresting, some of the symptoms related to Alzheimer's. This physician was working in the neurobiology area, landed on this. We were able to actually bring it out. It's actually even off patent. That's how long ago this happened. And he subsequently left Children's because his research took him in a very different direction, because he identified something that was really very important in the adult population, and so he moved over to an adult facility. So you never know where your science is going to go. You never know where the applications may be identified. We've got some, as you can see, this is not all drugs. We've got monitoring software. We've got communication devices now being developed and used, not just for children, but we are also working on some communication devices for adults with ALS and the like. We've got a number in just coming on the market for hemophilia, a drug that hopefully will be an important treatment for kids with hemophilia and eventually adults with hemophilia. And then we've got a number of them, as you can see, in clinical trials. We also got, that first round were drugs that were able, or or products that were able to be licensed to other companies because they were interested, they saw a market. These interesting companies were formed by Children's Hospital because there wasn't an interest. There wasn't a big enough market, or there wasn't a company that had an interest in their pipeline of bringing in either a therapeutic, a reagent, a drug, a device, or some other form of product. So these are all the companies that we have started at Children's. One of them is really cool. I'm just going to talk about one of them. Affinivax was started by one of our infectious disease doctors who is working on a very, very low-cost vaccine for pneumonia. And he's entirely funded by the Gates Foundation because he has identified a platform for creating vaccines, starting with the pneumonia vaccine, that will now be available at very low cost to third world countries. And so there's some really exciting things going on. He believes this platform could potentially be used for other viruses and other vaccine development in other applications. And that's really why also the Gates Foundation is so interested in what he's doing. So lots of exciting companies being formed. What I'm going to do now is just give you a couple of examples of some exciting things that are right on the cusp. They're not quite out to market. They're right at that really interesting stage where the physicians, the researchers, and sometimes even nurses and respiratory therapists and pharmacists are now getting really excited about becoming innovators. Marcia Moses and Ed Smith. Ed is a neurosurgeon who excises most of the brain tumors at Children's. And he and Marcia have lit on a way of trying to identify the actual biomarkers that are excreted in urine from children who have had brain tumors excised. And what they're now doing is trying to see if they can literally track, after the brain tumor's been removed, track recurrence. The important part here is that in children, it is really hard to track the recurrence of things like brain tumors. You have basically two choices. You wait for symptoms, or you actually scan with CTs, which expose the child to radiation, which is not good, especially if you do it repeatedly, or you give them MRIs. Now, MRIs are not exposing kids to radiation, but if they're very young children, of which many of our kids are, they have to be sedated, so there's the risk of anesthesia. So our clinicians are constantly saying, how do I get information sooner so that I can do something, but I don't put the child at risk? And that's what drives a lot of the innovation at a place like Children's, is not just saying I want to do something to get a product out or because I really think there's a cool, exciting thing, but I truly want to make a difference in the quality of the life of children, not just preserving their life, but also ensuring that if I can do something to cure them, the long-term impact of that cure doesn't impede their ability to learn and grow and the like. This is an exciting one. This is in cardiac surgery, where our chief of cardiac surgery is just one of those incredible innovators. And he is developing a glue with his colleagues at the Brigham so that there's an adult option. He's working with a company called Gecko Biomedical and MIT to try and create this substance that when exposed to light will seal two pieces of tissue together. So think of closing a hole of a heart in a child who is born with a hole in their heart. Or think about the potential applications in a battlefield, in the emergency unit, when people come in with perforations or lacerations or the like. So this is now also in clinical trials, and I think is got application that is really quite exciting. Another area that has been spawned is this use of 3D printing. And some of you may have read some of the exciting things that have also come out of Children's, where we're using 3D printers, actually creating an exact replica of a child's head, a total skull, and all the organs inside the skull. So the brain, all of the vessels, the tumor, if there's a tumor, where the physicians can take basically a practice shot. So obviously if you're any kind of sports enthusiast, people can practice before they actually go and either get on the mound or they get up to the tee or whatever. Our surgeons have been hampered by having MRIs that are 2D, and then once you're in a very different field because you're 3D and you've got lots of physiology, you've got a lot of moving things like blood and fluids and everything else. So the exciting part about this 3D printing is you can actually take an MRI of a child and then we have 3D printers. We're now doing it in color so that you can actually see the various shades and colors of the organs. And the physicians, sometimes teams of surgeons, can practice on this skull exact replica of a child. We've done this now with brain tumors, with excising and repairing things like venous malformations, atriovenous malformations in the brain, and whole reconstructions, craniofacial reconstructions of children born with their whole facial bones deformed when they're born. And so they can actually do multiple surgeries and identify what they can do in the first surgery, when they'll stop, when they'll go back, and the like. It has reduced the number of surgeries that kids have had. It has made their surgeries more successful. It has also kept them under anesthesia less time. So it's not just that they feel better and they get better results, but it's also a much safer opportunity for kids. One of our interesting doctors is believe it or not, she has a PhD in astrophysics, but she's also an MD. And she's doing work with a number of physicists building MRIs and building different forms of brain imaging for the smallest babies that we have. So we have a neonatal intensive care unit that takes care of kids that are born at 28 weeks or 29 weeks. We're trying to understand, based on what we do for those kids to help them survive, what impact it has on their brains, what impact it has on their future learning, how the brain develops, and what we're doing with drugs and sometimes resuscitation. And the work that Dr. Ellen Grant is doing is actually studying what happens as we take care of these very, very tiny babies. Sometimes now we can actually do this in utero and start imaging the fetus so that we can study how the brain is developing. And how, one of these things that she's studying right now is why the brain forms all of these crevices and wrinkles, and how that relates to language development, behavior, and the like. So there's some really exciting things that are going on in her work. Again, in cardiac surgery, Ram Imani has another set of issues because he does a lot of the valve replacements in newborns. And he can repair a heart, he can repair a valve in a child, but the problem is once the child grows, because we do this in neonates in many instances, the valve is too small. And so the child has to come back in for a valve replacement. And so what he has tried to do is say, how can I avoid the number of repeat surgeries that these kids are coming back with until they reach sort of adult size? That doesn't necessarily mean adulthood, but sometimes at 16 or 18, a child has stopped growing. And so at that point, you can stop doing surgery. But between the age of, say, 0 or 1 or 2 months, there's a lot of surgeries that have to be performed. So he's using a valve in a cow vein in the leg of a cow to try and install that or insert that into a child and see if in fact it will grow. He's doing it in animal models, and he is now starting to move into children to see if in fact we can actually have this valve grow with the child to avoid future surgeries. Switching over to orthopedics and sports medicine, Martha Murray is a really interesting orthopedic surgeon who's been at this problem that she's been trying to solve for 27 years. She started this when she was a medical resident, a surgical resident, where she was very frustrated watching how ACL repairs were done. How many of you have had ACL repairs? One, at least one. So ACL repairs require tendon grafts because what she has identified is that the ligament does not heal on its own. So you have to have a graft that stitches the ligament together. The problem is, as she has been working on this over years, all the ones that she have done have been varying forms of arthritis, especially for young people who have these ACL repairs when they're young. If you have one when you're older, there may be a higher risk of arthritis development. But in younger people, because you do it so young, there's a danger that these children or young adults will develop arthritis in their older years. So she tried to figure out why the ligament does not heal and realized that there was no blood flow within the ligament. So she has developed a sponge which she then soaks with the patient's own blood, and she actually sutures it to both ends of the torn ligament. And what she is finding, and she's obviously done this many times over, first in animals, and she is now in clinical trials, and they are incredibly successful. The first child is now back on the field with a completely healed ACL. And so this is really exciting because it could change dramatically how we think about repairing things like ACLs, and application for other injuries are also there. So about 6 or 7 years ago, one of the things I was trying to figure out was, how do we create a broad-based environment at a place like Children's for innovators who have ideas that might not be in the lab, they might not have NIH grants, they might not have a donor who wants to support them. And so I created something called the Innovation Acceleration Program and hired our first Chief Innovation Officer. She was a PhD in metallurgy who had gone into the healthcare field from MIT and had started a couple of companies and had really gotten excited about how do you actually bridge the idea to getting it to a place where you have proof of principle, where you then could potentially get either funding, whether it's NIH funding, it's Department of Defense funding, or it is potentially even venture capital funding. And so she built this program called the Innovation Acceleration Program. And we now have dedicated staff. One group is working on software development. So we will provide people with really good ideas that go through this whole vetting process of coming up and showing us their idea. And we will give them dedicated software team to help them advance their idea. We also give out what we call Innovestment grants to people with good ideas. And they span everything from a nurse who has developed a Mylar cap for neonates undergoing surgery because they lose so much heat from their bodies through their heads. She has now developed a cap that's also now in clinical trials, where she has been able to preserve the body temperature of little babies undergoing surgery. This was a nurse in the OR who was struggling to keep the temperature of the baby steady while the baby was in surgery. So it's those kinds of very interesting things. We've got pharmacists, we've got respiratory therapists who are all coming up with either ideas, ways of reformulating drugs that are more efficient and more effective in various processes. And we give out very small grants, $10,000, $15,000 grants, and these people can then get not only the help they need, but also we support them with advice and advisors from business development and other areas that really will help them think through their business plan to take it to the next step. We've got also a number of different things that we sponsor, like luncheons, teach and learn, websites that people can go to. And we have actually had our third pediatric hackathon, where we have invited people from all over, not just inside the hospital, but they can team up with people outside the hospital. And in fact, I think some of the exciting things that have come out of that really are quite interesting. Innovation at Children's is really about first stimulating excitement and enthusiasm, and then trying to enable those ideas so that we really can get people from idea to some place where it helps them. It's a big difference from where we were 10, 20 years ago, where really we were very traditionally basic science oriented. In the last 10, 15 years, that pendulum is swinging not away from basic science, but to include that broad array of discovery and innovation. And then we work very hard to both enable and to build on their ideas. Okay. So the question that has also come up, our first innovation officer has left and gone to industry. And so we looked in-house for another chief innovation officer. And we were very lucky to have identified someone who has come out of our bioinformatics area. Because this whole question about how do we look at the whole patient's journey, not just when they have a slice of their time with us, but patients, we want to keep kids well, we want to help them in their journey when they're not well, and then we want them to get back to a normal, better quality of life. So as we've been thinking about all the pieces of our journey, we've been thinking about all of the pieces that patients and families go through, starting with health and wellness, going through awareness, building education, giving people the right information, education, and tools to stay healthy, and then all the way through. We've been largely focused in this area, diagnosing, a little bit around treatment decisions, and then actually delivering care. But we believe that it's really important to link all those other pieces, because what we're finding is we can do a very good job in a slice of people's time, but then we either leave people on their own to find that solution, or we leave them on their own at the back end when we say, okay, you're done, we're done with you, you're on your own. And that's where we also believe our responsibility is to innovate in all of these pieces. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. Out of the pediatric hackathon, one of our GI doctors, our gastroenterologists, and one of our nutritionists realized that they were diagnosing lots of children with GI problems that related to their nutrition. And they would say, well, you have celiac disease, or you have colitis. And then the parents will say, so what do I do? How do I feed this child? Where do I go for information? How do I know what's proper to do, what's not proper to do? And so they have formed this interactive website. It is now a company called Kindred Food. And it's really quite exciting because it's an interactive way that parents can go on and say, my child has been diagnosed with this problem. What are the resources available to me? And can literally go in, and there are other parents who are chatting on it and the like. So it's really pretty exciting because it's now doing a lot of work of bringing families together to help each other. Another thing that we've been working on in that whole spectrum of journey is trying to think about how we're going to move into this whole aspect of Obamacare, taking risk, going into accountable care organizations, being responsible for the whole population of children, and thinking about how do you interact across the various areas of both home, school, physician's office, hospital setting, emergency room, and the like. One of our programs is called, one of our sort of services, I would say, or systems that's been developed is something called TryBox. This was a program that was developed by a developmental physician and a doctor in the emergency room, who were seeing lots of children with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or with autism, or with learning disabilities. And they were getting these diagnoses, and then they were sending these kids off, sometimes on medication, and then they'd wait until the kid got in crisis, or they'd be trying to manage this over the phone. And so they developed a tool, a web-based tool, where both parents and teachers could enter data in, and if the child was old enough, could enter in their own data, and talk about how they were doing, how they were behaving, whether there were, sometimes the child would report one thing, the teacher and the parents would report something else, and so you'd get a much better picture of what was happening when you actually were treating these children. We started with ADHD and putting the children on drugs, and it also is something that triggers an alert to the attending physician if there's something that looks like it's going really wrong. So it is preventive in the sense of the physician gets an alert, the physician calls the family, probably has stopped a number of emergency room visits, and certainly the kid getting into crisis or having a really bad act out in school or at home. So TryBox is a really great tool. We now have it in 11 different clinics in asthma, in diabetes, in epilepsy, in headache, in a number of the various services, because it really is an incredible tool for our physicians to interact both with families, patients, and obviously even in schools or daycare centers. So I'll wrap up with, I think, where I started, and that is to say that what's really exciting is that you build first on a true foundational pillar. You build on your history, you build on your successes, but you also build and create a culture and an environment that is, I think, supportive of people taking risk within boundaries. We have lots of controls. Obviously, the most important thing we're doing is taking care of children. The risks that we take have to be extremely measured. But our physicians and our scientists are at a place where sometimes the children have no alternative. There is no treatment. There is no cure. So we're aggressive about getting compassionate use from the FDA to see if, in fact, when there is no alternative, whether we can, in fact, try something within very controlled environment. And in fact, some of those have been absolutely just groundbreaking changes. One where we've actually been able to treat a child now with liver failure who's on parental nutrition because it's the only way they can absorb nutrition in their bodies. The problem was the nutrition was causing their livers to fail. They were going into complete liver failure requiring a transplant. We have now found actually it's a fish oil on the market called Omegavan. We tried it in a compassionate use trial for a group of children, first in the lab in mice and rats. It was unbelievably exciting, the results that came out. Tried it in compassionate use. It is now in 12 clinical trial centers across the country, and we are avoiding liver transplantation in just countless numbers of children. So that's the kind of thing you build on, and then you try and create an environment that really says everyone has a good idea. How do we help you get those forward? So I think I'll end there and certainly answer any questions.
That was tremendous. Yeah, I probably started by pointing out I was a huge fan of Children's Hospital, and I'm even more a fan after listening to all this. I just, one of the things, if anyone's taken my MBA class or my management classes, the value of a mission and doing everything one can possibly do to achieve that mission, whether it's for-profit enterprise, not-for-profit enterprise, bringing together all the people necessary. I just, just listening, you called it the foundational pillar. In business class, you call it mission. And to see the ability of teams of people from across the spectrum of skills and interests do what you described and what people have done. I mean, we want to take questions. There are a couple of people with microphones here, but if I could just ask the first one. Very recently, there was an article, I think it was Stu Orkin, finally saw a drug come to market that he began working on 30 years ago. I think that was the theme of the story. How does one keep focus on that and keep focused on that kind of mission the way Stu has, the way the institution has supported that?
So, first and foremost, that comes from within. I started in science, and I was a research assistant in both School of Public Health and then at Texas Children's and MD Anderson. And I realized that's what you needed. It had to come from first here, and the perseverance and the commitment to saying, I'm going to stick with this. Dr. Folkman is another example. He was heretical in terms of his work, and he just kept blinders on and said, there is something here. I'm going to make cancer a chronic disease. I absolutely believe in this. I think it has application to vascular diseases, to cancer. And he never gave up. And he's got disciples in his lab that now is named after him, who have been at it with him now for 25, 30 years. Stu is another example. He is absolutely committed not just to pediatric cancer, but his is the trial that probably will go forward with sickle cell. So they have these absolute, sort of goals out there, and they stay focused. Luckily, many of them are funded. So they get funded. Their science is excellent. Their perseverance is excellent. They build excellent teams around themselves, and they continue to get funded. The challenge is when somebody has a great idea, and Dr. Folkman was like that, or our stem cell program, where if you remember, the president basically said, no, you're not going to use this form of stem cells. We had to create a laboratory where there was federally funded stem cell research and philanthropically funded research. Excuse me. We had to put tape on the floor, because if the people doing philanthropically funded research that was not approved by the government literally moved over here, we could have been fined and could have been shut down. So there's a lot of barriers that exist, but we have wonderful donors who fill in the gaps. We have some funds that are generated through a margin that support research, and it's that keeps the engine going.
Just to give the students the idea of big business, if you share, the annual revenues of Children's are what ballpark?
Just over $2 billion.
Yeah, this is business, guys. It's one of the largest businesses in Boston, actually. So, okay, questions? Raise your hands and.
So kind of a follow-on question based on what Fred was talking about. You were talking about basically the importance of champions who really push an innovation forward. Something that our students spend some time thinking about when we have strategy courses is, when does an organization need to decide that certain domains are not part of their mission? So you could have a champion who's working on something that might not be in your sweet spot. How do you handle those issues?
It's challenging because we are such a broad institution that almost anything could potentially fit. So the example of the neurologist who developed the Namenda drug was a good example. His research started in more basic neuroscience, was more focused in pediatrics, and then it started to shift to more adult work. That was more of a clear example of when you say he was looking for space. We had to make some tough choices about expanding his program, and we basically said, we can't give you more space. We need it for these, and the choice was he decided to leave. So sometimes it's not giving people additional resources because you just can't continue in that area. Other times, it's the same is true. Many times we lose really good people. We were starting off in a big regenerative medicine program with a Dr. Tony Atala, and he got an offer from another medical school down south, and we just could not match it. And so sometimes you lose people that way, even though you might want to go in that direction. You can't really match what somebody else is going to make their centerpiece of their research. There are challenges every day. Yesterday we had a meeting because we have probably 25,000 square feet of requests for space, and we will have about 11,000 coming online. So we're going to have to make some very tough decisions about which programs we will support. We have, every year, we have something called the Scientific Advisory Committee. They are world-renowned scientists that come and evaluate 3 to 5 of our programs every 3 to 5 years. And we basically use their judgments as well to help us make decisions. If they say, this is unbelievable science, this person is right at the cusp of something, they need more resources, they need more space, we will take that seriously. If they say this person is floundering, they don't have a mentor, they're not really going anywhere, they've been at it for 5 years, either mentor them and get them going, or if I were you, I'd start thinking about how you start moving them out. So we use, clearly our resources are precious at Children's, as they are most places. So whether it's space or philanthropic dollars or some of our endowment dollars, they get spread pretty thinly. And so we have to make some tough decisions, and that's how we do it.
Other questions? Down here.
So I know you have this big initiative with big data and different software development. And so a lot of students here obviously are pretty good in this area. How do they get to learn about, they may be thinking of a software company or a data analytic. How do they find out the opportunities that are at Children's?
You mean from outside in?
Yeah.
So we have a growing IP office that's staffed with people who really support. We have a website, and it's called our I get so many acronyms, I don't even know what they stand for anymore. Our Translational and Innovation Development Office, so TIDO. We have a website where we post a whole host of innovations and almost ready kinds of things. We hold lots of seminars a couple times a year so that people can come in. Our innovation office and our new chief innovation officer is on the road all the time and he's doing a lot of work, particularly in the software area. So lots of speaking, the website. We hold lots of seminars and invite people from anybody who wants to come. So there's, and then people go out on their own and they're sort of trying to figure out where to take their idea and see who might be interested in helping them take it to the next level.
Now, hi. I was very interested in your last example of finding a fish oil that would protect the liver and prevent liver transplants. And it led me to wonder what the profile is of complementary and alternative care at Children's. A lot of what you talked about was very high-tech, and yet the use of fish oil seemed pretty low-tech by comparison.
That was sort of through trial and error, trying to identify what the nutrient was that was missing in the liver, such that it was causing the liver to fail. And so they went through, and a lot of this is also the use of big data where they can go in and do lots of screenings over and over and over again to understand what the components are, and understand whether there's an opportunity to use an existing product for something else. So that was that one. But in an alternative and complementary medicine, we have a program that provides pain relief through a number of different both medications, but also through acupuncture. We have an acupuncture service. We have a program that deals with palliative care. So we have, and that doesn't mean just end of life, but it's treating kids with chronic pain or chronic illness in a variety. We do Reiki, we do a whole host of other massage. We'll do it for parents, as well as we can do this. We have something called the Center for Families, and have a whole host of resources for both children and families. Many, many times families come and they stay with their kids for literally days, weeks, months. And so we have lots of services through our Center for Families that are also there for families that are also related to some extent to the alternative medicine options that we offer.
In the back?
So thank you so much for a very informative talk. That was great. So we teach our students that technology creates tremendous value and benefits, but at least in the healthcare sector, it also leads to a non-negligible driver of increased costs. And I thought it was fascinating that some of the research that you highlighted, the substance that melts tissues or the early diagnostics for the brain tumors, I mean, to me that strikes as sort of cost-reducing technology. So I was wondering if you could sort of discuss a little bit about the role that cost and cost-effectiveness of these technological advances. What role does that play in the research that you conduct at Children's?
Sure. So we are obviously under enormous pressure on the cost side. In 2008, as we were starting to really see the effects of Romney Care in Massachusetts, Boston Children's is the most expensive hospital in Massachusetts. It is expensive for really the reason that we are the only freestanding children's hospital. Children's care is more expensive than adult care, but we are a huge target by legislature, by employers, by the payers. And so we've been under enormous pressure at Children's since 2007, 2008. We put a huge process in place to try and take cost out of the system and try and maintain, now under the tremendous pressure that we're under at the state, to keep overall state expenditures below 3.6% per year increase. And so that has been a real driving force within Children's. The challenge, though, is that a lot of the technology, as you say, has added cost. The EMR, electronic medical record, and the requirement for more data, whether it's regulatorily required or based on interest in gathering either phenotypic information for research or just gathering more information for patient safety or for quality, is driving up the cost of care. And so we're constantly looking for ways that that technology, at least on that front, can substitute for human input, and that's really, I think, the biggest challenge we have right now, and replace it with information that actually comes off monitoring equipment or other devices that will produce and put the data inside the system, and then hopefully be retrievable rather than having every single thing be hand delivered into the system. It's probably the biggest challenge we have is the amount of data that's being requested of our clinicians, but the output and what they're looking for clinical research and for even basic science to correlate the genomic information and the phenotypic information is enormous. So I think that's one of the areas that I think we are desperately looking for. And I think today we just are close to inking a relationship with our EMR vendor to really try and go to the next generation of looking at much more efficiency in our systems, but also how to really take some of this and use some of the remote using data that we can really deliver remotely, as we've been talking about with TryBox and alike, and then get it back and have it actually analyzed for our clinicians so that they are not having to do this either human to human or analyze the data, either putting it in or retrieving it out. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge we have right now.
So I would, what I'd like to do is, I know some of the students are going to have to run out to class. We're going to continue this conversation at a reception down the hallway in the research showcase. Everyone's invited to adjourn to that location. We have food and drink, and we've asked several of our faculty members to serve as leading a conversation about just these issues. Before we close, I want to do a couple of things. One is I want to thank Corey Blanchard for making everything happen today. Corey makes our group function, and I'm deeply appreciative of all the efforts. For the students who find this interesting, which I hope is all of you, we are working very hard to understand how to best integrate the perspective you heard today about the potential, the business generative potential, the mission-driven potential to better our society of biology of basic research in the business education. Many of you are in the LSM we call Health and Industry, which is the second major. If you're not, you should be. Or actually, we've recently launched first majors now in Health Studies, which you take with Business Studies. And we'd love to hear from you about your interests, if this is interesting, and how we can help you in your education here at Bentley to achieve your goals the same way you heard some of these social goals are really being achieved. So that's my sales pitch. And with that, I want to thank Sandra again for coming. I also want to thank the Center for Women in Business for co-sponsoring this. We are going to ask you some questions about that at the reception, and I hope everyone will join us down the hall as we adjourn. Thank you again.